Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and if you're a Netflix junkie or you're addicted to Amazon Prime or Hulu or any of the other online entertainment services, you may always be looking for something really good to watch, especially if you're into TV series. And one of the best you could watch is a police crime series that ran for 5 years from 2002 to 2007 that helped revolutionize contemporary television. It was called The Wire. It was all about the crime and corruption of Baltimore and a handful of dedicated cops who were doing their best to clean up the city and make it safer for those living in the projects and the towers. The Wire had a reality to it, as well as 5 seasons, each a story about a different slice of life and corruption in Baltimore. And it was the creation of a brilliant writer-producer named David Simon. And now David Simon has another HBO series to his credit, one with a distinctive Jewish theme called The Plot Against America, a mini-series of Philip Roth's counterfactual novel in which Charles Lindbergh, a Nazi sympathizer, becomes president in 1940, defeating FDR on a platform in which America's heroic aviator promises to keep American boys out of Europe's war, World War II. The series follows a Jewish family in New Jersey and the way they each respond to growing systemic anti-Semitism, reminiscent of 1930s Germany. The series stars Morgan Spector as the young Jewish father, Herman Levin, who's determined to weather the storm as an American. His Jewish wife, Bess, who begs Herman to leave for Canada, is played by Zoe Kazan. Winona Ryder plays the glamorous unmarried aunt, Evelyn, whose fears of becoming an old maid drives her into the arms of a much older rabbi, played by John Turturro, who in the series becomes Lindbergh's Jewish apologist. And as is true of any show David Simon does, the entire cast is just superb. And by the way, JBS's own Tisha Bader has a bit role in the series, playing a congregant in synagogue. The Plot Against America is a terrific period piece that reflects the questions Philip Roth had about the quality of Jewish life in America and about the way in which people can fool themselves to the point of disaster. It's another winner by David Simon. By the way, in 2011, I was covering the Federation's Jewish Assembly, and a speaker was introduced to talk about the importance of the mitzvah of tzedakah, charity. The speaker was honest, courageous, and inspiring. That too was David Simon. So what a kick it is for me now to welcome to L'Chaim and JBS the prolific creator and writer and producer of some of the finest programming on television for more than 20 years, David Simon. And David, I cannot thank you enough for finding time to join us here on L'Chaim, and Mazal Tov, Yasher Koach, for all the fabulous work you've done in virtually every genre you've touched. And again, thank you for what you've provided us. with hours and hours of marvelous entertainment and insight.
Thank you for having me. I believe we were at the Federated Convention in New Orleans.
Yes, New Orleans, after the hurricane.
That's why they had me speak, was I was down there doing Treme, and they wanted to speak about the post-Katrina situation in New Orleans.
Yes.
And that's where I got up and made some enemies in the Federation.
Yeah,
but thank you for remembering.
You did. It was a courageous, by the way, we play it often still on JBS. I just adored it. So before we talk about television and, you know, The Plot Against America, which is on HBO now, and a little bit about The Wire, which you heard, David, when you look back, before I even talk about you, when you look at your work at The Wire, do you appreciate that it was just one of those rare moments in life when everything came together and you did something so important for America at the time?
First of all, I don't spend a lot of time looking back. It's a weird vibe for writers to reread your old stuff, or to rewatch film. I don't know how many other writers experience this, but I do, which is you all writing is not finished. It's just you run out of time and you run out of resource, and you have to turn it in, and there's a crew waiting, or there's a publisher waiting. And so you effectively abandon the project at the moment that you can no longer hold on to it. And so if you spend a lot of time looking back at stuff, all you see is the mistakes.
Did you have a good time doing that series?
Yeah, most of the time, yes. The camaraderie of television is on the set. You're laughing when things go right. You're rolling your eyes with Confederates when things go wrong. There's a certain charm to getting the work done because so much stuff can go wrong, or so much stuff can metastasize differently than you imagined when you publish the script. It's a very communal and collective creative process. And that's the part that's fun. I think that part was the most fun for me when I was a newspaper reporter and I was in the newsroom. The idea of the people around you, and the paper's got to come out in the morning. And there's something similar that happens in film. So yeah, I think I can't claim that it wasn't fun. I find I do better work by looking at what's in front of me and not self-assessing.
All right. It's interesting to hear. I will come back to this later, but before, I want to understand who the heck you are and how did you become David Simon, and what your early life was, your background, what kind of Jewish home you grew up in Baltimore. Tell us a little bit about who your parents were and the kind of home that you grew up in.
Typical middle-class family. I actually grew up in the Washington suburbs, in a Silver Spring, maybe about 200-300 yards from the Washington district line. And we were conservative in our Judaism. I knew enough to be fairly educated about Jewish ritual and theology. I don't consider myself to be theological at all. I think I'm a secular Jew in many respects, although, if you put me in a synagogue, I know the liturgy, and I won't embarrass myself.
I understand.
But the great joke in my family was that the synagogue that we fail to attend regularly has to be conservative, that we wouldn't be caught dead in a Reform or Reconstructionist shul. But neither did we have the consistency. We celebrated Passover. We gave each other gifts on Hanukkah in that formalized way that Hanukkah has been made to stand against Christmas. But Saturdays were not for shul. We didn't keep the Sabbath. I never kept kosher. My parents, a generation earlier, would have started their marriage with a kosher household. Those rules of Leviticus were held in abeyance once it became clear that my brother, who was an incredibly finicky eater, had been eating bacon from the the neighbor, the Irish neighbor who lived upstairs in the flat in Bensonhurst, and he was gaining weight. And at that point, bacon was on the table. So I grew up by the Chesapeake Bay. I learned to eat crabs when I was 13, 14, and so I'm Jewish culturally. Theologically, I'm probably an atheist, if not at best an agnostic. I don't believe in chosenness, but I do believe in the cultural wit and demeanor. And I guess you could call it ancestor worship of being born a Jew.
I understand. It is very real what you describe. And I happen to think you describe what most American Jews feel. And I think there's enormous validity to it. What was your father's name?
My father's name was Bernard. Bernard Simon was the public relations director for B'nai B'rith for, I guess, about 25 years. He also ran the staff retirement plan afterwards, actually. He figured that out. He began his career with the ADL. Actually, he began his career with the Jewish Telegraphic Agency in the late 40s after the war. Not immediately after the war, but fairly soon after the war. Took a job there, and from there became on staff at the ADL in New York. And then the family moved from New York to Washington before I was born, when he took the job as the National Public Relations Director for B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith is a Jewish service organization in America.
I think I read, I may be wrong, that the father in The Plot Against America is patterned after your father. Is there any truth to that?
No, the father is patterned after Herman Roth. Philip Roth, where the material originates with his novel, clearly was using his own family and driving them through this alternative history of America. And that is, I think, apparent. There are moments where I am able to graft in some of my dad's humor and his a little bit of the Yiddishkeit and it's just certain things where I was able to tailor his voice to the pre-existing character. That's probably the fairest way to say it. There's a couple lines in there that made my whole family smile.
Oh, so. Can you tell us which lines?
There's a moment at the Friday night dinner where he talks about, do you know how much you'd pay for the soup if you went downtown to Katz's in New York for it? And he says $1 a spoonful. And it's something that my dad used to say almost every Friday night to my mother about her soup, and she would say every week the same company, every week the same soup. That was homage. There was a later moment at the end of the miniseries where he's with his son. They've made it back to New Jersey after this incredible exodus through the American wilderness, past pogroms, and to rescue this kid and bring him back to Newark, New Jersey. And they've come through hell and high water. And they're at a roadside stand, and they're served a bologna sandwich on white bread with mayonnaise. And there's a famous story in my dad's his personal history. He was one of about 80 or 90 hostages taken in what was known as the Hanafi incident in Washington, D.C. in 1977, when a very disturbed guy, it was really tragic. I can't go into all the details, but it was quite tragic, and he was torn up by grief, and he lost his mind. And he took over 3 buildings, including the B'nai B'rith building. He took over the Islamic Center, the B'nai B'rith building, and the district building. And he held hostages until the ambassadors from some Muslim countries managed to talk enough Quran to him that he let everybody go. But my father was one of the men designated to feed the other hostages who were all tied up on the floor of their building. And these guys were walking around with scimitars and guns. And at one point, to his coworker, he was feeding these sandwiches that had been donated by the Hilton Hotel, and they were bologna with white bread and mayonnaise, which, if you know the Jewish, cuisine, it's anathema. And his friend Sid Kloster said to him, white bread, mayonnaise. And my father looked at him and said, "Sid, I think they're trying to kill us." And it was one of the funniest lines he could have possibly delivered, and really caught the spirit of, he's a funny man. So I gave that line to Herman Levin in the piece.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
David, how old were you when your father was taken hostage?
I was probably 16, coming up on 17. I was probably a few months shy of 17 years old.
So you remember it?
Oh, yeah. I remember it very.
Was it scary for you?
It was weirdly abstract. I mean, I thought my father was going to be killed. I mean, I thought this is going to end badly. There was, in the takeover of the district building, a reporter was killed. Marion Barry, who later became the mayor in D.C., was shot and wounded as a councilman. Some people at my dad's office were stabbed. Interestingly enough, not the Jewish employees, but some of the non-Jewish employees were treated worse. And one of the guys down in the print shop was stabbed. In fact, his blood was on my father's shirt because my father had tended to him in the early moments of the takeover. And I have to say, I was sort of in a state of like awareness, but it was so surreal that I was sort of contemplating the worst, and then the worst didn't happen. That it was, I found myself sort of out of having another body moment as a kid.
Okay. I'm sorry he went through it. I'm sorry you went through it. What was your mother's name?
Dorothy Ligeti.
Okay.
But it was really Leibowitz. It should have been Leibowitz. My grandfather changed it in Budapest to a Magyar name to try to get work around the turn of the century. He took a non-Jewish name.
What was your mother's tone? To what extent did she create to what extent did she influence you?
My father led by example. He's a very good writer, my father, and he was a very startlingly moral man. I've yet to find a moment where he veers from my idea of what's right. That sounds like hagiography, but sometimes it was his downfall. He was very loyal, very institutional. He served his whole career at a nonprofit that he believed in. He trained as a journalist, and it fascinates me because I don't think he could have endured as a journalist, at least in the journalism that I knew, the post-Vietnam, post-Watergate era. He was not adversarial with the world. But my mother was the intellect. My mother was a very smart woman who, as Jewish women did, left Hunter College after maybe a semester and a half to get married and raise a family because that's what Jewish women did. And she regretted it. She still regrets it to this. My mother's still alive. She regrets it to this day. She feels like there was a career out there that she was supposed to have. She was incredibly smart about the human mind. She went to college when I went to college. I was the youngest kid. She was summa cum laude. I was summa cum nothing. She was the better student. She got a degree in psychology. She for a while, she was a crisis counselor for runaway kids at this facility in the DC area, and she was one of the best counselors they had. She was so shrewd about the human mind and therapies, and the conversations with my mother was the person who put us in touch with our souls in a very direct and intellectual way.
David, you were very lucky to have the parents you had.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you said you have a brother. Is that your only sibling?
No, my sister's passed away. She was an artist, painter, fine art. I had a sister who was 10 years older than me. My brother's 14 years older than me. He is the chairman of the Department of Infectious Disease at GW. He's the smart one.
Really?
And yeah, he is.
That's an important position these days.
Oh, yeah. He's very busy right now.
What's his name?
Gary Simon. He came into his career in infectious disease, and they thought they had the world conquered with antibiotics. And then he walked right into the AIDS epidemic within a couple of years after his residency. And now I think he's finishing his career on another pandemic, which is even more profoundly complicated in some respects.
So David, what college did you go to?
University of Maryland. I'm a Terrapin. The turtle. I'm a Terrapin.
Okay. And so, David, how do you become a journalist at the Baltimore Sun working the police desk?
I edited my high school paper, which a lot of kids do. It's no big deal. And then I walked into the University of Maryland Daily, which was a 35,000 circulation broadsheet daily newspaper. That was probably one of the best in scholastic journalism. It was like publishing the equivalent of a modern metro section of a healthy newspaper every day for 5 days a week, which means I failed out about 3 semesters. I eventually got my degree. It took me about 5 years and a couple of summer sessions to get my degree. But I kind of went to grad school in the middle of it because I worked my way up and I became the editor of the paper. And that was probably my real graduate education in sort of institutional structure and writing, editing, leadership. I mean, you were in charge of a staff of about 40, 50 people. And it grew me up in some ways, maybe not in other ways. Baltimore did the rest of the work. But I came out of the university.
Yeah.
I came out of that experience. After 4 years, I had about a little more than half the credits I needed. So I had to still stay in school a little bit. But I started stringing for the Baltimore Sun. I started working as a stringer, covering the campus and covering the Washington suburbs. And that year, I probably had about 120 bylines. So much so that the union had to inquire as to whether or not, I was starting to, that's kind of a union violation when you're writing that much and you're not on staff. And that's when I found out that the union rep had been told, we're probably going to hire the kid if he graduates. So they did.
Okay.
That's how I got.
But then you end up on the police desk. How did that happen?
That's entry level. That's the standard. First, they give you a couple weeks of obits. Then they might send you to cover a few feature stories. But if they think you can write and be a little bit accurate, the real proving ground is they put you on the 4 to 12 police beat, and you start covering. You start chasing ambulances basically. And so that was entry level. The joke about me was I never got promoted. I just made it into a better and better beat. I think I kept covering criminal justice stuff even after I got put on, all through the city desk. After I started taking rewrite shifts. I still covered that beat with projects. And then eventually they moved me to an investigative enterprise unit, but I still had used criminal justice issues as a priority for my coverage.
All right. And then the way the story is told, at some point you ask for a leave of absence for a while because you want to write. Can you tell us what was happening then in your life?
Let's say I was 26, and I'd been writing for the Sun for about 3.5 years. And I'd gone through a couple of years where I probably had 300 bylines in a year. I was just, you're like a machine, you just fill in the paper. But I was looking for what the next moment might be. I guess a couple years earlier, I'd been in the homicide unit of the Baltimore department. Those guys had to answer the phones and give us whatever the fresh murders were. There were probably 2 murders every 3 days at that time in Baltimore. So we were always on the phone with these guys, and we're always haggling with them for detail. They want to hold back details of their crimes, so we want to report more. So it was always like a delicate relationship. And Christmas, I brought him a bottle of bourbon and to thank him for the year of hassling him. And I sat up there on Christmas Eve and I watched sort of the mayhem. It was actually a quiet night, but there was still some violence. I watched it wash over the midnight shift. And I wrote it as a column. I didn't tell him I was going to write it, but I wrote it as a column about Christmas Eve in the homicide unit. You can sort of sense the humor. Anyway, when I was up there, a detective named Bill Lanzi, a really great guy, no longer with us. I remember he turned to me and said, man, if somebody ever got up here for a year and just took notes on the stuff we say and the things we do, they'd have a book. And he was laughing. He was laughing about something that, he wasn't looking at me. He looked almost past me. But I remembered it. And in '87, we had a strike. The Guild went on strike against the management. They were trying to take back medical benefits. They were looking for givebacks. And the paper was incredibly profitable. So I was in a bad mood. And I was a strike captain, and I was not. I walked back into the building kind of angry. I didn't want to give up the job. It was a good job at a fairly good newspaper, but I was looking for something for leave of absence. And with cause, you're allowed that under the contract. And if you sell a book, that's cause. So I asked the police department if they'd let me into the unit for a year, and they did. They let me join the unit as a police intern. I could write what I wanted. They didn't try to exercise any serious or any real editorial control, which would have been untenable. The only restriction on me was I couldn't write for the newspaper while I was taking these notes of what happened in the homicide unit in Baltimore in 1988, and that became my first book.
Was it fascinating to you?
It was great. It was a lost year.
How was it great, David?
Well, I saw things I never, I saw this assembly line of American violence and, sort of the wages of poverty and class structure and economics and the drug culture. And, I saw it. I was given a vivisection of all of it for a year. And I was also given these characters who were, by and large, there were some weak detectives in the unit. There was 36 guys, and I was on a shift with 18 of them. But by and large, among those 18, there were 6 or 7 or 8 of some of the smartest, shrewdest, not just instinctual, but downright clever. I certainly came to admire the skill set, what it takes to solve an urban murder. Mm-hmm. And I watched, there's a lot to condemn modern police work. Certainly, I'm not a fan of the drug war. It's become a war on America's poor, and it's completely dystopic and cruel. And it's not targeting illicit drugs. It's targeting the have-nots. It's a means of controlling American urbanity, where we have not offered any actual connection to our elemental economy anymore. So I'm really down on a lot of what passes for bad police work in my mind. But when you ask guys to go out and solve a murder, you go out and you stand over a body and you try to figure out who killed this person. That's kind of a societal goal that I don't care where you stand, left or right, but, you can sort of get behind the notion of, well, yes, somebody's killed somebody probably needs to attend to that and resolve that crime. Mm-hmm. So I was getting the best of police work with some of these men. So I certainly admired that skill set.
Okay. And at what point do you meet Ed Burns and this partnership develops?
Well, I met Ed in '85, well before the homicide unit. I think I can say it now because we're elsewhere, but I wouldn't have said it then. He was one of my best police sources for a while. He was a detective in the homicide unit, but he was doing wiretap cases, Title III cases against major drug traffickers, which is a lot of the subtext of The Wire, or a lot of the skeletal outlines of The Wire.
Absolutely.
But I met him. He was detailed to the drug task force in '84, '85 to do a case on a drug trafficker who'd had an incredible 30-year history in Maryland, in Baltimore, called Little Melvin Williams. On The Wire, you might know him as the Deacon. We cast him as the church man, who later consults with Colvin about Amsterdam. So that's the actual real Melvin Williams on parole from his federal crime, put in prison by Ed Burns on a wiretap, who then came on as an actor to read for that. I mean, there's a lot of inside humor to The Wire.
Wow.
But Melvin, I was doing this long project on Melvin, and I met Ed because he had done the wiretap on Melvin, and we started talking about that. And then later on, when other cases came up, or when I had other questions about stuff going inside the police department, I found Ed to be careful as a source, but forthright and very accurate. And so we became friendly on that basis.
Okay. So tell me how The Wire comes to your mind and what propels you to do that series?
Well, by the time I'm getting ready to go out on my second book in 1993, Ed has finished 20 years in the police department. And I very much admired his skill set, his investigative clarity, his attention to detail, his humanity. He was also somebody who had spent 20 years. He was a Vietnam vet who fought in that losing misadventure, and then gave 20 years to the drug war. And he had become deeply cynical about the purposes of the drug war, as had I from covering it. And so I said, Ed, what about we go to a drug corner? Just pick a corner at random, an open air drug market. Let's meet the people there and write a second book. And that's the beginning of my professional collaboration with Ed Burns, was the book, the prose book, The Corner, which became an HBO miniseries before The Wire, six episodes and done. And I wrote that with my friend David Mills, an African-American writer who I knew in college. HBO was willing to fund that as a miniseries, and they were just starting to get into counter-programming networks. So the idea of a show about the people in a drug corner, which could have never flown on network television in the 90s, they liked the idea of that. But they didn't want two white guys writing it. That scared them because all the characters were African-American, and they thought, we're going to get our heads handed to us. We have to pair you up with an African-American writer. So I picked a guy who was one of my best friends, who was, at that time, he and I had written our first homicide script together. He had gone on to LA. He was working at the time on LA Law. He'd worked on NYPD Blue for a number of years. He had a career, and they knew him as a African-American writer writing at the highest levels of television. And so as soon as I mentioned the name, they said, can you get David Mills? I said, only if I ask. And that was it. And so Ed was sort of left out of that part. But I said to Ed, we're going to have to write it tight. It's just going to be about the McCullough family. It's not going to be about all the issues we raised about the drug war in the corner, about policy. For that, we're going to have to do something bigger. Why don't you start looking at how we might structure that? So while we were working on The Corner as a miniseries, Ed Burns went back and started thinking about The Wire. And we went straight from The Corner. Corner turned out very well for HBO. We made it on budget. It won a few Emmys. And they said, what else have you got? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, Ed Burns and I are working on something that would be much more politicized, but cover some of the same ground as The Corner and beyond. And so that's how we began.
Fascinating. When you started with The Wire as opposed to The Corner, was there in your mind a social agenda part of that, of what you wanted to do with the series, as opposed to it being a simple cop show?
Yeah, I had no interest in writing a cop show. I wanted it to be, at best, or at worst, I should say, a critique of the drug war. I wanted to turn as many viewers against the idea of drug prohibition as I could. I wanted to make it that anybody who was portraying themselves as a drug warrior in terms of policy should have to answer for the human misery that was involved in trying to police what is effectively a health problem and a problem of socioeconomic disarray. And then as a larger theme, and I don't know how successful this was, we wanted to depict a national status that I felt had sort of a postmodern problem in America, which is that because we're so good at politics and so bad at governing ourselves, the actual problems are no longer given recognition, much less addressed. Mm. We don't solve anything. We just kick cans down the road. Mm-hmm. And so everything we brought up, from educational reform to the death of work and the brutalization of the working class, to the drug war, to our political infrastructure, and why the very rhetoric by which we elect people, preordains a certain degree of failure. I really was trying to say this is why we don't work anymore as a society. And that's much more amorphous than attacking the drug war on the merits.
Absolutely.
But I felt like that did permeate. I think one of the reasons it feels like you believe this city is in this level of disarray, and you know why, is because I think we worked off the real Baltimore, and I think we captured a good chunk of that. I hope we did.
You heard me say in the open that I was sympathetic to the African Americans, the kids, and the people who were running them, the Stringer Bells. When I said that, did you say to yourself, oh, yeah, that was one of the things we were hoping for? Or
Sure.
did you say to yourself, what in the world? How did he like those guys?
No, I'd even go further. I'd say there are very few people. There's a handful of people, usually, and they're not usually as evil as they are mediocre. But there's a certain number of people who represent the institutional prerogative in the wire, whether it was the police department or the school system, or maybe some middle management in the drug culture, or management in the last season in terms of journalism. That if there's any villains there, those are the villains.
Absolutely.
But we didn't play them for like, they didn't get up every morning and say, I'm the villain. It wasn't Richard III. It was more, I'm just trying to get through the day on a pain and pleasure principle, meaning whatever gives me pain, I should move away from, and whatever gives me pleasure, I should have more of. They will never extend themselves, and they will never endure risk. And the very mission of the institution itself is sublimated to their wariness of pain. And that's probably everybody else. I liked everybody we wrote. You would come to me and say, I like writing this guy, he's okay.
Yes. All right, so I want to ask you a couple of characters, and in a moment I'm going to talk to you about your series that runs right now that has this Jewish theme to it, and I don't want to give away where the story goes and how it ends up.
Sure.
I feel a little less reluctant to do that with The Wire because it's been out for so long.
12 years. It's been 12 years. If you haven't seen it, tough. Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, so I'll ask you some questions in general. I was very taken by the character of Omar. I want to know how that was created, and Omar's surprise end, which just is so random.
It didn't feel random to me. Maybe it's random. I don't know. It didn't feel that way to me. It felt like that was the move, but that's just me.
Well, but it's not part of the plot. It's, Omar, there are instances where Omar, who's part of the drug world, is in danger, and he could die in his conflict. The way he does die, he's just he's at a bodega one day, and out of nowhere, someone who has no relationship to him kills him, shoots him dead. Now, that is probably how life works all the time in the setting that you're dealing with. But in terms of TV drama, TV morality, it normally never works that way. So I was taken aback, and I said to myself, this is not something that happened accidentally. I assume there was thought put into when, how, and why does the Omar character come to an end? Is there any story there?
We made the choices we did. I would say, if you think about the other choices, that Omar should go on living some mythic existence as if as if his run can't be defeated, as if he's something so larger than life that he steps out of the bounds of Baltimore, Maryland. I think we've defeated the fundamental themes and sub-themes of the show. And if he goes down in a blaze of glory against Marlowe, against the institutional drug trade, you're basically just satisfying people's desire for a Peckinpah like blaze of glory that
Yes.
doesn't speak to anything. He dies a gunfighter's death, which is to say he doesn't see it coming. You know, the 12-year-old kid enters the bodega. He clocks him because he clocks his surroundings. That's what a gunfighter does. But then he turns away thinking, well, that's not a problem. He makes it's a miscalculation that a gunfighter would make. And if you watch American Westerns as a cultural art form, and I've pretty much seen all of them, the idea that the gunfighter, by virtue of his reputation, becomes a target for other ambitious players, and the aspirations and imaginations of, Jesse James was shot in the back by the coward Bob Ford. I mean, we've all seen that Western. And Omar was in some respects playing by the iconography of the individualist in a show that was placing individuals at the margins of institutional prerogative. So he was playing against the rules, and he played it about as well as you can for as long as you can. But the idea of letting him win seems to be an affront to everything we were trying to say. And the idea of delivering to the audience some glorious end to a life lived on those terms also seems a bit of a lie.
I give you
he's based on real people.
Yes,
Omar's
I give
based
you
on real
enormous
people.
credit for not doing it in what would have been a television cliche. So good for you. Again, out of nowhere, the editor in season 5, is he patterned after anybody that the editor, and I don't remember his name, but he's the one who suspects that the writer's story is bogus the whole time, and he's sort of the idealist in the newsroom.
Yeah, I mean, he's a collection of about 3 or 4 people. Rebecca Corbett was my editor from the time I came on. She was the night metro editor at the Baltimore Sun when I came on Night Cops. When she went to day shift, when she became the city editor, she took me on the city staff off the night desk. And when she went to Enterprise and Projects, she took me as one of her handful of reporters. So I had a career with this woman, and she made my copy 30% better year after year. She asked questions. She could destroy a story by finding something asking a question about something in your 8th paragraph that would make you have, it would end up ordering up another 3 weeks of reporting, and you might blow your own story up, but that's good journalism sometimes. She's still in it. She's at the New York Times. She's an assistant managing editor. She just won a Pulitzer for the Harvey Weinstein coverage. That was her team.
Wow.
So she's legit.
Yeah.
And so Rebecca Corbett's kind of buried in there. Steve Luxembourg, who was the Metro editor who hired me, later went on to work at the Washington Post, is genuinely, and I don't say this about many people in a newsroom, and I admire a lot of people in a newsroom, but he's genuinely an intellect when it comes to journalism and its ethic. I put some of him in there. Yeah, it's based on some of the better aspects of editors I've known.
Very nice. All of your characters are nuanced. Even those who are, the best of them are still struggling with issues, and even the worst of them, they're struggling also. It's an interest. One of the reasons why it was so successful as a series is because the characters were not cartoons. You didn't create cartoon characters. And after The Wire, there have been other shows that tried to do the same thing. And again, I'm not saying nobody did it before you did it, but The Wire really was a bellwether in the way in which television was written from then on. One more, and then we'll just move on to
Sure.
Plot Against America. You have some characters who represent idealism. Reddick plays this police lieutenant who ultimately might become commissioner, and on principle, he basically turns it down because he's not going to falsify the numbers for the mayor. McNulty, who's a complicated character, ultimately wants to do good. And even though he cuts corners and ultimately he has to leave the department, his heart was in the right place. And he was trying to do the right thing. And I give those two as the prime examples of people you created who were driven by a sense of idealism. Talk to me about how you created and why you created them and the extent to which you feel I'm describing them accurately or I'm a little off.
It's funny. To me, McNulty is driven more by an intellectual arrogance than the desire to actually put people in jail who he thinks should be in jail. He is somebody who is smarter than his station. I sort of always saw him as a kid who grew up Catholic in the northeast quadrant of Baltimore City, joined the police department because it was a paycheck, found that it was a calling, found that he really enjoyed it, and then found, to his wonderment, I thought probably at the district level, and we did some of this in the backstory that Jay Landsman talks about him earlier, about how he always thinks he's the smartest son of a bitch in the room. And the problem for McNulty, as with any spoiled child, is that what's really problematic is knowing the Baltimore Police Department, a guy like that was the smartest person in the room, more often than not. So he was validated in this vibe. And I think in some respects, most of the best detectives I knew, they didn't wear on their sleeve. You know, one of the great lies that I always experienced when I watched television drama or film about police and detectives in particular is the idea that you stand over the body and you contemplate the humanity of the person and what's at stake and why you have to catch the killer or why the murder has to be avenged and why and you pick up the sheet and you look down at some girl who could have been your daughter or some kid who could have been your son or somebody or your neighbor's son, and you say, oh God, what a waste, it's on me now to solve. I never saw a detective do that. It doesn't happen. And if it does happen, that detective's no good. You don't want him standing over your body because he's going to screw the case up. The one you want is the guy who says, okay, somebody killed this guy. It's on me. I caught the case. It's on me now. This guy thinks he's smarter than me. This guy thinks he can shoot a gun in my city and I'm not going to catch him. And that's enough. So I always felt like McNulty was a prisoner of his own arrogance. I don't think he thought the drug war meant anything. It was just the terrain on which he found himself. And he was trying to do cases because these guys were killing with impunity. And that was an affront to him personally. Never mind the nation of laws aspect. It's like, these guys, they think we're schmucks. They think we're schmucks. We're not schmucks. That's McNulty to me.
Okay, but explain to me, why does McNulty refuse to sort of go along with this notion that the 8 other murders at the end of the series should be put on this homeless guy who did commit 2 murders, and ultimately the head of the commissioner says to him, go back and get a confession on the others, and McNulty said he didn't do them. And the commissioner says, so what? He's going to be in a rubber room. Let him confess, and the whole thing goes away. And McNulty refuses to do it. Wasn't that out of principle?
No. Again, it's the same. I mean, I think some of it was McNulty had incredible guilt that he had crossed the line and done, he had perjured himself in fundamental ways as a police officer. He'd done things that were, for whatever reason, ended him as a cop, and he knew it. So I think he was a little bit ashamed. There's part of that. But if you're asking me why he wouldn't do that, it's the same level of arrogance as, wait, if I give a murder to somebody who I know didn't do it, then the guy who did do it is laughing at me. Somewhere out there is a guy who did do that murder. Or if it isn't a murder, if what you're saying is the case isn't a murder, and it was one of the ones McNulty made up, then I guess it doesn't mean anything, except it makes McNulty part of the same statistical corruptions that destroyed his police department. You know, one of the great venalities that we played all through the wire was the idea that stats lie. That as soon as you, in this world, as soon as you create a metric that's supposed to show progress so that majors can become colonels, there's 4 guys down in the basement figuring out how to corrupt that stat and make it mean nothing. And I think McNulty is as aware as any cop is of what a stat says and what it doesn't say. So the idea that he's going to give you some clearances that aren't actually clearances, you know, I think that there's too much vanity. You can call it honor, but I think no, this is why you guys are able to not do police work for as long as you're able to not do police work.
David, what makes you angriest about the way in which society works or does not work now? And it's reflected in the writing you do, but at the same time, you're a person. And as you do your craft, you're driven by whatever drives you. What are the things that you wish we were more sensitive to that really upset you about the way the system works that makes you angry?
I think I have a journalist temperament. I'm not a journalist now. I'm a dramatist. I'm aware of, look, I did that job for a while. I'm aware of how hard journalism is and what the ethic has to be to do it well. So I'm not comparing what I do now with journalism, but I am saying I have the same impulse. When I sit down to think about, what could be a dramatic narrative, I'm trying to have an argument about where I think we've gone wrong and where our structural society is failing to address some basic questions that go to the heart of our governing legitimacy. I think right now, the mechanism by which we determine what truth is has been utterly shattered by social media and by the collapse of a mainstream media. The mainstream media was never perfect. It was far from perfect. It was always a rough draft of what we thought was going on. It was subject to all kinds of biases. It was never going to be perfect. But that's the same as every other element in democracy. If you're trying to self-govern, and I use this on the one sheet on the poster for Plot Against America. My father, every Passover, he never dropped this line. This line stayed in our personal family Haggadah. I heard it for 50 years. My father would say that freedom can never be completely won. It's never complete. There's always an insufficient amount of it, but it can be completely lost. And that happens the day you take it for granted and you stop having the quotidian fight. Every day, if you want to have a society that governs itself, every day, a sufficient number of citizens have to go out and kill a few snakes, and they have to be actual snakes, and you have to know who the snakes are or what they are if they're systemic, and you got to try to leave every day a little bit closer to better. And the moment that you stop, or the moment you assume that this is not your job anymore, the totalitarian impulse is right there, waiting. And we're finding that out as a country right now. And so I've watched as my first career choice, journalism, has been marginalized and effectively defeated by a framework that takes truth and tosses it aside and says, truth is what I'm willing to put on the internet. So I mean, I get up every day and I say, I got to tell stories that I believe are an accurate representation of where we are and why we can't solve our problems or even address our problems or even admit our problems. So at least I'll have done that, and nobody can say they didn't know, because I feel like we're at that point. I mean, in some respects, I'm feeling much as any rationalist must have felt in 1932 or 33, before they burned the Reichstag, but before, the point at which to make those comparisons to the fascist impulse is not when they've strung the barbed wire and the camps are up. At that point, you're too late. The point is when they start marginalizing vulnerable groups and when they start metastasizing the truth into the big lie. And we're at that point right now in our country and in the West, not just America, but in the West. We've lost the thread of the two things you need to govern yourself effectively are a certain degree of education on the part of at least a strong plurality of your citizens, and that their access to what is determined by the vast majority of people to be, well, this is true, this is empirical, this is happening, this is not happening, this is happening. If you wear a mask, your chances of catching the coronavirus go down. If you don't wear a mask and you ride the subways and we have theaters and ballparks open, it's going to spread faster. The idea that empiricism is up for grabs and that the citizenry is now too vulnerable and too uneducated to complain about that, or that they're comfortable with that, is terrifying to me. So you've asked what I care about. It makes me not only angry, it makes me afraid.
I understand, and you say it very, very well. And I appreciate that you were willing to answer that question. And some of the things you said bring me now to your current series. Again, I want to give things away.
Sure.
What I've seen in writing, and I never trust what I see in writing, is that you said that when you created the series, when you went to Philip Roth and got his book, it had nothing to do with what was going on in America at the time. And yet at the same time, here we are. And that's almost what you've said, and here we are. So I want to know what prompted you to go to Philip Roth. And by the way, was it easy to get Philip Roth to give you permission, David Simon, to do a television series on his book or not? And then why in the world did you spend time and energy doing this series, which has a Jewish component in ways that your other series have not?
To the last part first, that's just happenstance. If you'd told me 10 years ago I was going to adapt anything by Philip Roth, an author that I can admire, but who felt very distant from the kinds of things that I did as a journalist or as a dramatist, I'd have rolled my eyes. I said, I don't do novels. I don't do literature. As I've been a reader of Roth, and I've admired his oeuvre, but this was a unique opportunity. Let's face it, to go to the first part of your question, he wrote a book that a lot of people took as allegorical for the Bush administration and the misadventure in Iraq. And he himself said, I wasn't thinking about Bush when I wrote the book. I wasn't thinking about anything other than an interview with Arthur Schlesinger about how there was a genuine fear on the part of the New Deal Democrats and on Roosevelt's part that the Republicans in 1940 were going to solicit Charles Lindbergh to run on an isolationist platform. And Roosevelt felt he could beat anybody the Republicans threw up from the mainstream Republican ranks, but he wasn't sure that he could beat Lindbergh. Lindbergh was one of the great heroes of that age, and it terrified Roosevelt in some basic way. And he was quite relieved when Lindbergh, for reasons of his own, turned down the Republican entreaties to take the nomination. So upon reading this, that's what Roth imagined, and he went for it. And he created this alternative history. And I remember when I read it, when the book came out, I thought, well, that was an interesting digression and an artifact, but I didn't feel the weight of George W. Bush in the novel. it didn't seem like, it certainly didn't seem precisely allegorical. And I moved on, and weirdly, in 2013, right after Obama's second inaugural, Tom Rothman, who's from Baltimore and was running a Sony studio out in LA, who I didn't know, he called me and he said, "You should make Plot Against America into a miniseries at HBO." At the time, he had stepped back from running a studio. He was getting into production work. I said to him, I don't feel like in this time where we just elected an African-American president for the second time, that the country's moving in this way where we're susceptible to demagoguery and totalitarian impulses. It feels like this book's out of time. I liked the book when I read it. He goes, read it again, read it again. I read it again. I called him back. I said, Tom, thanks for thinking of me, but I got to pass. I don't see it. But at least it was in my head. Instead of reading it in 2004, I now read it a second time in 2013. After Trump was elected, I'm sitting around with the HBO guys, and we're talking about what political tract ought to be made now to comment on the election of 2016. And I brought up that book, and I said, I didn't even bring it up for me. I brought it up just, guys, whoever's got the option on the Roth book, Plot Against America, that's the dynamic that led to Donald Trump. That, and the amazing thing about it, which Roth himself later affirmed is not consistent, is he needed a hero to imagine America being so duped. He needed a guy who was genuinely heroic, charming, cowlick, Midwestern clipped accent, self-effacing, genuine charm. He needed that guy to sell us on this level of demagoguery. When it came time for us to actually buy it, we didn't need the hero. We just needed the real estate magnate and failed casino operator and reality show host who has not a lick of heroism or personal magnetism that I can determine. Anyway, he was astounded that Trump was the guy. And so was I. So I said this to them. And I don't know that I made the case of telling them to get the book and option it to somebody. And I was there to talk to them about other projects. But they told me that Joe Roth had come in and had the option, and that they were thinking about it, but they probably weren't going to bite on it. So I got back to Baltimore, and I told my assistant, call Joe Roth, because I heard Tim Rothman. Joe Roth, Tim Rothman, Philip Roth. There's too many Jews, too many names Roth in this story. But that's exactly. I thought I was calling the guy who told me to read it 3 years earlier. I forgot. So I get on the phone with Joe Roth, and I say, "You were right. I was wrong. You were prescient. I was not. I just want to let you know I put in a good word for you with the HBO guys. I hope they come back. Go with God. You were right. I hope you get it made." And he says to me, "Have we ever talked before?" And I said, "You tried to get me to write this 3 years ago." He says, "We've never talked. You're the Wire guy, right? I've never talked to you in my life." I said, "What are you, losing your mind?" I said, "You're the Roth who used to run a studio, right?" And he says, "Yeah, I used to run Warner Brothers." He also ran a studio. Go figure. So now I'm convinced. Now I'm yelling at him, what are you, senile? Finally, he realizes. He goes, "Did you talk to Tim Rothman?" And I'm an idiot. I'm just like, "Yeah, I'm sorry." So I got off the phone thinking, he thinks I'm a moron. And I just embarrassed myself. I hang up the phone. 10 minutes later, he calls me back and he says, "Do you want to write it?" That's how I got involved in the project. But as soon as Trump was elected, if you looked around for something allegorical that could speak to what had happened to our body politic and what was, what the transformational moment of 2016 was, nobody did it better than that book. And when I met Roth finally, he said, "I didn't write it for this moment, but this moment found it." I mean, he watched what happened with Trump. He said, "I see why you're optioning." Yeah. And yeah, I know why you're here. I know why you knocked on my door. So.
Are you pleased with the miniseries?
We did the best we could. You're asking me to look back. I think we actually improved upon the allegory in some ways. There were a few things in the book that I thought were vulnerable. Not as a novel, but as a miniseries.
Yeah.
You know, when in the book, when Lindbergh's plane just disappears magically and we revert to the Rooseveltian history, I thought that was plausible in a novel, and that he was able to set it up by talking about the earlier plane crashes that Lindbergh had when he was in the air service, the air mail service, and that he was missing for 2 days during the campaign when his plane had to touch down. He set it up as best he could, but it still felt a little bit quick, the reversion. You know, Roth was brilliant with character and dialogue and the human spirit. That's there's no more honest writer about the human condition. He's not a guy who lives for plotting. And so when he was done with his alternate America, it snaps back a little bit quickly. 6-hour miniseries, I'm not sure that. Okay. So, I mean, I'm glad we did that.
Roth has an interesting relationship to the Jewish community. Many feel that he doesn't like much about Jewish life, and that whether it's Portnoy's complaint or whether it's Plot Against America, the question is, what is he saying about Jewish life? And I'm saying to myself, as I watched the series, that didn't seem to be what the series was about, although so much of it had to do with the extent to which the family that we are following is struggling with the question of what is life going to be like for Jews in America if Lindbergh wins, and the issue of the rabbi. But he's played by a non-Jew.
No, I have to disagree. At this point, John Turturro, by virtue of having played Bernie Birnbaum, Primo Levi, Barton Fink,
fine.
He's the most Sicilian Jewish actor we have.
Fine. I will accept the notion he is a Sicilian Jew. Very, very good. But anyway, the character he plays, which is like a Quisling, is an interesting piece of the dynamic of the Jewish component to your series. So, setting aside the political allegory, what do you see your series saying about Jewish life in America?
That it's varied. I think if you look at the Levin family, the 6 people to whom we granted point of view, you're looking at the spectrum, the entire political spectrum that runs from absolute resistance and dissent in the case of Alvin, to absolute complicity in the case of Bengelsdorf, the rabbi. And I think that is the same whether you're Jewish or not. We didn't do the piece we absolutely did not do the piece because we felt we needed to have a discussion about anti-Semitism or Judaism, or even the notion that Jews right now, American Jews, represent the most vulnerable cohort. They do not. And I say that knowing that anti-Semitism has been ratcheted up by these appeals to nationalism and white supremacy that the president has tacitly endorsed at points with his, good people on both sides insanity. There is more anti-Semitism now, because whenever you start marginalizing anybody, any cohort by race or religion, that train of anti-Semitism is never late. I mean, that one always leaves the station running right beside whoever. So when you start going after Mexicans and people of color and Muslims, you're certainly going to metastasize the hate that's going to reach out and touch the Jewish community. But they're not putting Jews in cages down on our southern border. Those are children of color who are being separated from their parents. And we're not talking about Jewish rapists who we don't want coming to this country, so to eliminate. We're talking about Mexican rapists, and we're not suggesting that we can't share in the world burden of trying to find homes for the people, these families from Syria who are women and children who have no place to go and whose country has been devastated. because we don't know how many of them would be terrorists. That's not being delivered to the doorstep of the Jewish community. That's the organized hate that is being delivered by this administration now. So we did this piece. Roth wrote about Jews in 1940 when they were seemingly vulnerable to the Father Coughlins and to the Lindberghs and America Firsters and Fritz Kuhn, and when they seemed to be, their Americanism was questioned, their validity as citizens was being questioned by people in 1940. And he used that. And we used it as allegory. But, you know, I was actually very disappointed by the Jewish press. There was a lot, quite natural. Maybe I shouldn't say very disappointed. I see it as inevitable. But there were all kinds of, particularly by some of the press in Israel, discussions of, well, why would you say this about Trump? He's moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He's a friend of the, you know, like that sense of tribalism, that narrowing of moral focus that says, well, is it good for the Jews? Which, you know, I heard growing up said in jest and also in seriousness on any number of occasions. I'm not interested in that. And I think in some respects, Roth got in trouble with some in the Jewish community because he was a writer of unrelenting honesty when it came to the human condition, and he would deliver good, bad, and indifferent on any character he felt.
Absolutely.
And you know, if you're telling me that there is no Bengelsdorf that could conceivably rise in America,
you're blind and a fool.
Yeah. Not only does Bengelsdorf exist in every age, and not only is the court Jew a paradigm that we've always struggled with, yeah. John Turturro, a very well-read man, in our discussions about the role early on, he seized on the parable of Rumkowski and Rumkowski's role in the Judenrat in Poland, you know, feeling as if he could rationalize and deal with the totalitarian impulse and could temper it if he could just get close enough to the throne. And of course, he ended up getting on the last boxcar to Auschwitz. So, you know, yeah. John Turturro brought the same logic. And I feel that, you know, for whatever degree of collaboration there is with this current political dynamic in the Jewish community, I feel like the same things are in play. And the people making this felt that was in play. There is as much indifference.
I will say only this much in disagreement with you. I can see many, many reasons why people are upset with the Trump administration and Donald Trump, the man, as president. I don't see anything that suggests Nazi Germany is creeping into America, and that Jews one day, or that anybody is going to be put into a concentration camp.
You don't see anything. You don't see anything.
Those kind of fears, I feel, go too far. It's possible to be critical without going too far.
I disagree. And I think if you make the allegory to 1942, you're playing false with the process. I feel like we're in 1931, 32, 33. And these are the moments. Just today, this president suggested that social media forums that are critical of him by presidential fiat should be subject to sanction. He just suggested that he's going to try this as a plausible fiat. This is the level of totalitarian impulse that has now become normal. I'm sorry, but it begins with the big. It begins there. It doesn't begin with the barbed wire already up.
Okay, and I've experienced sort of the opposite, and it is very upsetting to me. I do a program where I talk about what it means to be a liberal Jew who cares about Israel. I grew up a typical liberal American Jew with all of the idealism of my parents. We were lifelong Democrats. It would have been inconceivable for my parents or for me ever to pull a lever for a Republican presidential candidate. Now I do a program that has the word Zionist in it, and YouTube takes my program down. And there is right now in America a tendency in America where some of the largest and most powerful people and organizations that are in charge of information think they have the right to censor an Alan Dershowitz or a Mark Golub. And I grew up with the notion that if there was anything that made America real and strong and vibrant and wonderful, and which made it a home for the Jewish people, it was a commitment to the First Amendment, the concept of freedom of expression, free speech, and that no government would interfere with another person's form of worship. At the moment, David, I am worried. This has nothing to do with Trump.
Well, interesting that you're worried from. Okay, well, I have no
reaction to Trump.
Let me just say, I have no problem suggesting, because I'm a First Amendment absolutist, that nobody should be silenced by government fiat.
All right, but they're silencing Donald Trump. YouTube and Twitter are taking...
Please.
Twitter decides that a tweet by the President of the United States should come down. I don't care what he says. I don't care whether it's stupid. Why would you
That's not what they did. They said they should accurately... The criticism is they should accurately depict it as the falsehood that it is. He libeled somebody. He's libeled Joe Scarborough. That's libel. That's a libel. And he's not, because he's the president, you can't actually do the civil action you could do if he was a private citizen. You know, there's one thing to saying you should be accountable for your words if your words harm and if they're abusive and if they attack people's reputation without merit. That is our mass communications law. It's the English common law.
No, that's not the only thing they've censored Donald Trump on. I don't want them censoring any of us. I don't want them censoring you or me or Donald Trump.
I don't know. I didn't see a lot of Jews standing up for that congresswoman from Michigan when she said the things she said, critical of the Jewish state.
If Omar or Talib, or anybody wants to say hateful things about Israel,
I don't think she said anything hateful.
They have the right to do so in the United States of America. We only have the right to respond.
Absolutely. I can say equally, I can be equally condemning of the settlement policy in Israel and of what Netanyahu has done to that democracy. And I say this as somebody whose father went to Israel in 52 and in 56, as early as that, as part of B'nai B'rith and the ADL, to shepherd conventions of American Jewry, thousands of people. But when to travel thousands of delegates to Israel was an extraordinary thing in 52, 56. We were a family committed. You know, I knew the laborites of Israel from my dinner table. People like Teddy Kollek and Dan Patir. These were house guests. I understood certain things about Israel that I can no longer apply as an American Jew. I cannot stand by this level of marginalization, this degree of contempt for a two-state solution, this affront to the absolute humanity of other people. And I will tell you something further.
You think Israelis have contempt for a two-state solution?
I think Benjamin Netanyahu is absolute contempt for.
Do Israelis have a contempt for a two-state solution?
I think a plurality of them do. I think
you're factually wrong. But now
you don't think a plurality of
what the plurality? Tell me what the Palestinian community says about a two-state solution.
Wait, no. Hold on. Let me finish my thought. There was, when I was growing up, a premise that the Arabs never failed to miss an opportunity for peace. That was a statement we were taught. If you're telling me that that doesn't apply to Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition, and that they haven't governed accordingly, and that the settlement policy is not designed to metastasize the present infrastructure and not honor the idea that there has to be a Palestinian state eventually alongside Israel.
Tell me how.
I totally
tell
disagree.
me how in your mind-
totally disagree with you.
Tell me how, in your mind, settlements preclude a two-state solution.
If you take the land before you divide the land,
How much land has been taken by the state of Israel for existing settlements?
why are there any settlements?
Why shouldn't there be settlements? This is not Palestinian land. It never was Palestinian land.
Excuse me.
By the way, in 1967,
I'm not going to deny the existence of what, you're going to tell me if we have to give it back to the Ottoman Empire?
in 1967, the state of Israel.
I understand the entire history of the country. I understand partition. I understand the Balfour Declaration. I understand the White Paper. I've got everything in my head, believe me.
Just tell me about 67. Forget the White Paper.
I'll tell you that in 67, Abba Eban said to my father, you know what, we'll need a generation before they'll be okay with it, and we'll have the West Bank.
Was he right?
No, he was not right.
Why do you know? On what grounds do you think he wasn't right?
You think Israel gets to retain the West Bank? Is one man, one vote work for Israel if they take the West Bank?
In 1967, the Prime Minister of Israel, Levi Eshkol, says that he'll turn over virtually the entire West Bank to Arab nations. They can do with it anything they want if they only make peace with Israel. And the Arab League goes to Khartoum in August and September of 1967, when all of the land is being offered as part of a peace deal.
I'm aware of this.
Okay, and they said no.
Is your contention?
And you're blaming
is your
Israel for that.
contention? Is your contention that the decisions of Arab states in 1967, which is a half a century ago, should preclude the aspirations of actual people who are on the ground, stateless now, 50 years later? That because this tactical or strategic error was made in 1967, that the people who are growing up without proper representation or statehood now have to wash their hands of any national aspiration because that decision was made and is final?
No, I do not feel
Okay.
that.
Why are you bringing it up in
Tell
isolation?
me the last time you've seen a Palestinian write an op-ed in the New York Times blasting Abbas for not meeting with Netanyahu. And tell me who leads the Peace Now movement in Palestine.
If I was Abbas now, I would not get in a room with Netanyahu or Kushner or any representative of this administration.
How about when Obama was president?
You think Obama was treated viably as a broker for peace by Benjamin Netanyahu?
By the way, Obama asked Netanyahu to make a commitment about shutting everything down for a period of time because Abbas said if he did that, he would meet with Netanyahu. Netanyahu publicly declared his support of the two-state solution. Abbas refused to come to Washington,
and they kept building settlements and making plans for settlement.
And I see this as a much more complicated issue. You see it as black and white, and Israel's black and
I see it as intensely I see it as intensely complicated. But at this point, I cannot look at the Netanyahu administration and his coalition and see them as an active participant in seeking peace. And I'll tell you something else. Generationally in the Jewish community, as untenable as I find the current Israeli administration, I still can call myself a Zionist in the sense that I believe there needs to be a Jewish state. If you talk to younger Jews in certain dynamics, particularly the more secular you go, the support that Israel has relied upon from the American Jewish community generationally since its founding is starting to fray. And there are American Jews now of a certain generation who cannot affiliate with this Israeli state. And they are growing more numerous. And that has been compounded by Netanyahu's interference in our political process, in the demeanor with which he addressed himself in the 2016 election. What he did with regard to Trump and that election has profound implications for how young American Jews are perceiving the state of Israel. It's been incredibly destructive. If you're somebody like me who's standing on the premise of there needs to be a Jewish state, it needs to have borders that it can defend, it needs to have a legitimate partner for peace in the middle, I believe all these things. I'm not black and white. But what I'm saying is I cannot abide this administration, not only for what they did in terms of American politics, but for what they've done with the settlement policy and for its intransigence to legitimate Palestinian Okay. There was a point after Oslo where Marwan Barghouti and people like that were ready to cash in the chips and take statehood and take half a loaf. And there were other points, there were others who were not, but those people were not empowered within the Palestinian culture. They were made vulnerable by Israeli policies. And that's what I believe.
Okay. Here's the position I am in. I find I am so taken by you. Even in your criticisms, I'm taken by you. I believe you are driven by the best of what makes human beings moral, lovely people, and what make Jews moral, lovely people. I don't believe in any way you're against the Jewish people. You've just declared the extent to which you really want there to be a viable, healthy, thriving Jewish state. The state of Israel, you want it to exist. And at the same time, you are very, very disappointed in what you believe a specific political leadership has been. It's interesting for me. I will be very anxious to see, David, what you do when Netanyahu is done. Netanyahu is almost done. And what's
not soon enough
is Benny Gantz has no different position when it comes to Palestinians. And that's because the Israeli doesn't see it as the American Jew sees it. You are 100% right when you say there are many American Jews, young American Jews, who are being turned off from a commitment to even the idea of a Jewish state of Israel. From my perspective, and I know I'm assuming you will disagree profoundly with me, it has to do with gross misinformation.
No, I'm not misinformed.
The comments you made about Barghouti are not factually accurate.
Oh, yes, they are.
All. If there were ever people in the Palestinian community who really wanted to make peace with Israel, there is within Israel a host, a plethora of Jewish organizations, NGOs. I have not met a single Israeli whose ultimate goal is that his grandchildren will never have to serve in the IDF, on the West Bank, in Ramallah, in Nablus, in Gaza. All they want is peace with the Palestinians.
Well, then there's going to have to be a Palestinian
state. If there were any legitimate leadership, I'm not blaming individual Palestinians. This is about people. This is about regime leadership. And unfortunately, there is no one at the moment, no one in the leadership position in either Hamas or Fatah who are ready to give up the money.
If you do not, in some fundamental way, deliver on the promise of a tomorrow in any credible way, and you do not empower those elements that are trying for peace from the Palestinian side in order that they can go back to their people and say, this process can deliver this, this, and this. And here's the first step, here's the second step. There were moments after Oslo, and there have been moments since, where to give back would have empowered those people to maybe transform, not Hamas. Hamas is beyond the pale. But within the Palestinian Authority, it serves Israel's absolute interest to thwart the viability of the Palestinian Authority and to thwart the viability of anybody who could be a leader who could aggressively negotiate with them. They are fine. They are fine with the inertia.
I don't
They
know
are
how
fine
you
with the
can say
inertia
that.
of the boss.
I-
They are fine with a boss.
It suggests to me you've never talked to Israelis.
I've talked to Israelis. I've talked to Palestinians. I'm going to grant that you have as well. We disagree.
If you go to an average Israeli, not even one who's involved in politics one way or the other, and you say to them, what do you want? Is that Israeli likely to say, I want to control Palestinian life and I want ultimately the West Bank to be Jewish? Or is he going to say, nothing would please me more than a compromise situation where we would live in peace with the Palestinians like Canada lives with the United States? They should have a good life. Not only that, we will help fund them. And my children will no longer have to fight and serve and be part of an IDF that has to worry about terrorist incursions into the state of Israel. Do you talk to Israelis who say that to you all the time?
Then my answer to anybody who would say that is stop settling the land, deliver the land. Do the overt and direct thing that says you are for a Palestinian state. Make the land viable for Palestinian statehood. Unilaterally go to the UN and say, we're giving it back. We need it demilitarized. We're going to insist on these conditions in terms of demilitarization, but we want to give it back. We don't want to be a state where the minority rules the majority. We want the population that is predominant on the West Bank to have self-determination. Go to the UN and give it back unilaterally. What better demonstration of what you're saying is the credible Israeli desire to peace could there be than that? It would be an extraordinary gesture. It would be a winning gesture. And it would say to everybody, we're not concerned about trying to settle this land out from under you. We're literally concerned about the idea of your self-determination. We're going to have to insist on certain guarantees in terms of demilitarization. If those are met, here's the land back. But the land's back, they've got a partner in Jordan. They've got a partner in Egypt right now. They're not doing the work. They're risking nothing.
Did they do that in Gaza?
Gaza's a whole different case.
Did Israel say we will unilaterally withdraw from Gaza, keep all of the greenhouses, make Gaza into,
right,
a Monaco on the Mediterranean,
and we will effectively stall on the West Bank on the larger share of this, so that we will delegitimize the Palestinian Authority with the Palestinian people and make Hamas even more plausible.
By the way, Israel is the one who protects the Palestinian Authority.
What does that tell you?
That
they love the idea of an impotent Palestinian Authority that is unable to deliver credibly to its people. That is perfect for the state of Israel. That's perfect geopolitics for Israel. They've made Abbas utterly impotent in the sight of his people.
Okay. The wisest thing we both said is we just see this differently.
We do.
And it's not that we see our goals are not different, which is a very important thing for you.
That's fair. I will say that. I don't think you're against Palestinian aspiration. I think your view of how we get there and what's required of the Israelis is different from mine.
Right.
I would agree with you.
I think you and I see it. What our goals are are the same. I have said forever, I'm in favor of a two-state solution. The difference between us is what we really believe the facts on the ground to be. And that's where you and I disagree. If the facts were all as you said they were, I'd probably feel differently. I would hope that if the facts were as I say they are, you would feel differently. And the challenge for people who basically want the same outcome, which you and I do, is to try to do the best we can to find out what the facts really are and to be open to those who are presenting the facts in as hopefully objective, unbiased way as possible.
I think there's a third element there, which is there are facts and then there are motivations, which is to say there are certainly failures on both sides, Palestinian and Israeli, in terms of seizing the mechanisms and seizing the opportunities that present themselves.
I agree.
And both can be criticized.
I agree.
I worry that the Israeli policies and procedures such as they are now for how they're addressing the situation are particularly designed to buy time to change the facts on the ground. I believe that the settlement policy is trying to create a fait accompli with Palestinian nationalism, Palestinian statehood, in the same way that Abba Eban in 1968 said to my father, it'll take a generation or two, but they'll get used to the idea that this is now Israel. And he was wrong. They did not get used to it.
By the way, there are those who believe that unless there is a major regime change where Palestinian children are taught in a totally different way of looking at the Jew, that it will never happen. And the question is, how do we live side by side?
I would not, if I was a Palestinian parent, I certainly would not be celebrating 1948. It would be the Nakba. I would be something. My aspirations are not your aspirations. I have to accept that, their view of the Jewish state, such as it is colored by their reality.
Do you think that Palestinian children should be taught that Jews are the descendants of pigs and apes?
No. I thought.
But wait a minute. That's in the public school system. Their math books say if you kill 2 Jews, then you kill 2 more. How many have you killed?
Listen, this hyperbole, I don't know what is in a Palestinian math book. And if you do, and if you want to show it to me, I'll say it's wrong. But if that's what it is, I certainly know that some of this stuff is elemental to the Saudi dynamic in terms of what they teach for their fundamentalist dynamic about Jews. But wait, they're our allies. So I guess the underlying reality right now is that Israel doesn't have to make peace and they don't have to offer anything. And the reason they don't is geopolitical, because Israel has become the first Jewish Sunni state. That's what it's become in a fundamental way.
What do you mean by Sunni state?
They are a bulwark against Iran for Egypt, for Jordan, for the Saudis.
Okay.
That the Saudis and the Egyptians have washed their hands of Palestinian aspiration because the real enemy for them is the Shia state of Iran. That is the geopolitical fight in which Israel is now allied effectively with the Sunni states. And that's the reality that everybody at the State Department understands, which is that Netanyahu doesn't have to do anything to service the 2-state solution other than keep building settlements, because there is no pressure from Arab governments. They are completely content to let the situation stand as long as Israel can be a bulwark with them against Iranian hegemony in the region. That's what's going on.
I understand. And Bo, you say that well. A lot of what you say I agree with. It's not that you and I want a different outcome. At the moment, our difference is over what the real facts are on the ground.
Okay.
And when I hear you, I
have your version of what you think is going on in one ear, and I have all my relatives in Israel. My relatives, the guys who were just in the IDF under Netanyahu, the people who have been living, who are to the left of me, some of them, or maybe not to the left of me, but who nonetheless have no illusions about what Netanyahu has delivered in terms of the peace process. So we're going to have to disagree.
I know an awful lot of people who hate Netanyahu and are going to be thrilled to see him go. And by the way, I find
They can all come over to my house for coffee. That was a wonderful aside. As you can tell, I like arguing.
I love your soul, David Simon. If we
Thank you very much for having me.
whether we
Thank you
disagree.
and thank you for a good argument. I will say, the one thing I will not cop to is being a self-hating Jew. Whenever somebody criticizes anything going on anywhere, as with Philip Roth, that's the first thing that comes out. Never been more proud to be Jewish. Never been less proud to be Jewish. It's who I am. So that's one I won't cop to.
I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha. You're fabulous. You may only go from strength to strength. You and your family should stay safe and well during this nonsensical coronavirus.
Crazy.
And David, what I'm hoping is when this thing is finally over, I'll be able to get you in studio and talk to you across the table. But I thank you at worlds for making yourself available to me. Thank you.
Thank you too. Be well. Sei gesund.
David Simon, one of the most creative talents in television today, creator of The Wire and The Plot Against America on HBO, a terrific period piece that raises some very important and disturbing issues about Jewish life in America. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me at rabbigolub@jbstv.org. And remember, you can now download the L'Chaim podcast and listen to L'Chaim in any room of your home or when you're out on a walk. Just take L'Chaim podcast with you and listen to all my conversations with some very wonderful people. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.